Welcome to Winners, Wallets, and Worldviews, the only show that's going to teach you how to be somebody.
Thank you again. Appreciate your time. We give a talk about the story of Cypress Semiconductor called 0 to a Billion.
You're not going to make it. It's not like being a star quarterback.
You guys are all leaders. You guys are trying to crush it.
Ladies and gentlemen, whatever's going on in your life, you're going to run into that block.
Recognize that you're leaving 95% of American business completely behind.
You guys are here learning, getting education.
You're going to run into someone standing there.
No. Michael Jordan's humility is what we're talking about.
Saying to you, you're not good enough to get through to the other side. And I say to you, let's roll, baby. Let's roll.
Welcome to Winners, Wallets, and Worldviews podcast on business leadership and life. Today I wanted to bring on a guest to talk a little bit about building wealth, but when you're young. I think that the narrative out there is that you have to be, 62 when you can retire, or it's 67 or whatever it is when you can max your Social Security. And, my guest today, Tyler Wright, has built a really incredible social media following, offering people tips and tactics on how to build wealth in their early 20s to late 20s. Tyler, sitting across, on the screen from me is a multimillionaire at the age of 27 or 28. And I think that some of the tactics are a lot of the same things that I've used and that other people on the show have used to build wealth at an early age. So I wanted to just get him on and have a discussion and get into the weeds on how other people listening can start to build this. So Tyler, welcome to the show, brother.
Appreciate it. I appreciate you having me on. Yeah, I've definitely listened to a few episodes before, and I love kind of what you go over, and I'm honored to kind of be able to share my story and, hopefully, some of the things, in my story and some of the strategies and tactics I talk about will be able to kind of provide value to, your listeners.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, man. Well, I'm seeing in your background, you got some jerseys and some football stuff. Were you a former athlete, or what's kind of your background?
Yeah, those aren't my jerseys. That's an Eric Berry jersey. I'm a big Tennessee Volunteer fan, so he's kind of like,
man.
Yeah, he's kind of, it's been it's I tell people it's funny. The first football game I ever remember watching was in 1998. So I'm 20. I just turned 29, so I was 3. So the first memory I have was that game, and they won the national championship, and then everything has been completely downhill since then. So I kind of peaked as a college football fan in my first memory, and then it's been backtracking since then. But yeah, I played. I tell people, like, it's kind of part of my story. Growing up, I think I was like a jack of all trades, master of none when it came to sports. I mean, I played golf, baseball, basketball, football. I don't know if I said golf already, tennis, literally anything and everything. And I always just kind of had a big love for sports growing up. And I think that's kind of one of the major things that really shaped who I was. And, all the different lessons that you're taught in sports between teamwork, leadership, accountability, showing up, things not going your way, persevering anyways, and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's probably one of the biggest things from an early age that really shaped, me and helped me do all these other things that we'll kind of go over later.
What were some of your goals early on in your life that made you want to be an entrepreneur or real estate investor, or where you had these kind of like big ambitions? Where did that start for you?
I think like you can trace it back to even when I was really young. For whatever reason, I still haven't quite figured this out, is I just wanted to be, I don't know about being the best, but maybe it was some of the, competitiveness of sports, but it wasn't really, hey, I want to beat the guy next to me. I always had an internal drive, I guess, to be like the best that I could possibly be for my own potential. So I was always kind of, racing against me from yesterday, I guess, so to speak. And so that's just kind of led from one thing to another. I've just always kind of taken on newer and newer, things in my life at each step. Beginning, out of school, it was really kind of a focus on, raising my income, which, obviously we can kind of go more into, but then it kind of was like, okay, I've kind of figured out raising my income. What's next? All right, now I want to, invest, right? I want to invest in the stock market. I want to learn about that. I want to master that. All right, now that I've kind of got that, what are, some other ways where I can maybe diversify or maybe have a better control of my money, right? And then it went into kind of real estate from there. And then, so it's always kind of been one thing after the next. And I think I knew from the beginning that normal people, aren't like that. And then, it's not really taught in society. And so that's kind of led me into, knowing that from the beginning with my personal finance, it wasn't that like my job was terrible or that it wasn't a lot of potential. I mean, I could still be working it right now and probably make 200,000-300,000, maybe more as time goes on for the rest of my life. But I think that I, eventually made a decision once I had built up a certain amount of money and net worth and passive income to where it really started asking myself, what do I want to do with my life? What do I want my life to be about? And I've always been someone that, has been, I guess, entrepreneurial in spirit. I've always been, I think to build wealth, whether it's in real estate, stocks, raising your income, all of this is going to require an entrepreneurial spirit to where you have to be the one where you're driving the learning, you're driving the extra, because again, it's not normal. No one's going to, hold you accountable unless you've got like just a really incredible group around you or your parents or whatever. You're literally running the business of you from like day one. You're the CEO of your life, and there's so many lessons that are kind of intertwined in entrepreneurship. Now that I'm, just literally like 100% full time in entrepreneurship, there's so many lessons that kind of overlap between basically just being successful and being an entrepreneur. It's really just kind of comes down to all the normal stuff. A want for more, an internal drive, accountability, discipline, learning, all these kind of things. So, that's kind of what I guess drove me in entrepreneurship, because I knew it was something that, I guess the first entrepreneurship, I guess, was really real estate, because that really is, that's a business, even more so than stocks. Like stocks, it's a little bit, you have to manage your investments or get someone that can, but real estate is really, it's investing, but you're running in a business, and so that I think I always knew that I felt like I was confident in the amount of control that I could have over my life and what I could do with that. And I felt like at some point working a 9 to 5, even though there's nothing wrong with it, I tell people there's no such thing as a wrong decision or right decision, unless we're talking about murder or something. There's only aligned and unaligned decisions. So for me, I realized that, working a 9 to 5 forever was not in alignment with who I felt like I was. And so that's kind of been my journey. And that was kind of the gas or the fuel to getting into some of these other investments was, hey, I know I want to run my own thing. And at the time I didn't even really know what that was. But I knew I would need money to be able to either fund that or to be able to, build up enough financial freedom to quit my job and go after the next thing, or, whatever it might be. Yeah.
Well, so I want to talk about this in a lot of detail, because I think this is going to be, from what I know about you, and we'll talk about this some more, is I think our paths to building wealth were very similar. And I think you and I are unique in the fact that we were able to get to that kind of 7-figure mark before we were 30 years old. And it seems like this is that, it's just impossible for someone to be able to do that. It's just totally not mainstream. If you are going to be a millionaire, it's really unlikely, and you're definitely not going to be able to enjoy that while you're young. But I think with these different tools, such as, multifamily portfolios in real estate, commercial real estate investing, leverage capital, all these different strategies we're about to talk about, it allows the possibility to build wealth early, quickly, scale, and other things. So I want to talk about, when did you first start, kind of this wealth building process, and break it down from like the first thing you started investing with and how you were able to kind of leverage and grow that.
Well, like I said, if you want to get rich, I mean, there's a multitude of ways, but it really comes down to creating income. I believe if you're gonna try to go the typical route through, using a 9 to 5 and then building wealth on the side, of course, there's people, you could start a business, right? Those are basically your two options: is starting some sort of business, so where you're able to leverage some sort of skill, create value, and build up some sort of equity in the company, depending on what it does. Or in your 9 to 5, you're going to have to create value and create capital somehow And so for me, I started a job. It was in sales. And so, I mean, my starting salary, which this kind of, I guess, blows people's mind, but I had $0 at 22 and my starting salary was $30,000 with not a promise of a dollar more, So for a lot of people, that's scary. And they're like, I mean, a lot of my friends were probably taking 40 or 50 or 60 right out of school, but it was something that was a salary. And there's nothing wrong with that either. But, it kind of comes back to the risk reward of life and believing in yourself. And, I knew that, hey, I'm somebody that I'm going to figure it out. Right. And I'm going to work more efficiently, and I'm going to work just straight up outwork everyone that's around me. And I feel like I'm confident in myself. And so sales is something where, you can basically decide your income and you can continue to grow it, which I knew was going to be important to build up capital to go into these other things. So, if you want to get rich either quickly or super young without, of course, winning the lottery or getting an inheritance or, a quick divorce or something, I don't know, like doing it like the right way, then you have to focus on building your income. And I think so many people, in kind of the space I'm in, talking about personal finance, there's this big like budget kick, which of course someone that makes $300,000 a year can still live paycheck to paycheck. It's just much harder to do. But if you had to give me two people, like a person that was $300,000 in paycheck to paycheck, or a person that was making $20,000 and saving, $1,000 a year, I would much want to work with the $300,000 person, because that's the thing that's much harder to do. And I can fix their habits in like 30 minutes. Like obviously it's going to be up to them with their action and their behavior. But the tough thing to do, which is why people don't want to talk about it, and it's why, a lot of people that are in personal finance, they don't even have an income, that's high. And so they're focusing on these other things, which of course you have to spend correctly. You have to, invest wisely. But I think the gas and the fuel is really the income. So for me, from the beginning, it was, hey, raise my income and keep my expenses.
So you basically took like a high income or a high sales potential job where you could have a higher ceiling with, I imagine, commissions or other types of incentives in sales, that your friends may not have taken a position like that because of the downside. They would rather have a more cushy, higher salary. But you saw opportunity to kind of scale that, because you can't really have a bottom line without a top line, I think is the Grant Cardone saying, right? So you're talking about generating a high income and finding the opportunity to be able to increase that income.
Yeah. You're talking about putting up a big number, right? If you're talking about becoming a millionaire or whatever it is, I mean, that you can't, you can't defense your way to $1 million. Like it's impossible. You have to play some defense, right? You have to, like, again, not spend every money, but we're talking about a very, very large number, granted in a relatively small amount of time. And what you need with that is you need offense. Like you need to be able to put up a lot of points on the board. And the way you do that is by, having an offense, which is raising your income. So for me, I did it in kind of a multitude of different ways. Of course, in general, it was sales. So it was just doing better at my job, obviously letting time kind of do its trick. But I also was, trying to be the guy that was in the next position that I wanted to be in before I was in that position, so that when something came along where there was even a higher, ceiling than the one I started off with, I was the guy that they wanted to put in that job, because I was already doing the things and thinking like that guy or girl was at that time. So yeah. I think it's kind of a working your job, doing your job, not stepping on toes, but you have to kind of look like, who's in a situation that I want to be in? How do they act? What are the things that they're thinking about? And how do I start to do things like that and think like that? So when the time comes, the opportunity presents itself, I'm the person that they want to put in that role. And obviously you could talk that topic about a lot of different things, but when it came to my W-2, I was able to kind of move up from a role where maybe it probably capped out at around $100,000, and so I was in that for like maybe 1 or 2 years. First year, starting salary was 30, but I probably ended up making 50 with commission. The next year I was up to like 90. And that's kind of when a role came available to, without going into the whole structure of the company, it's staffing. So basically I just moved into a role where there was a much higher ceiling, where I was working with different clients. And so that ceiling was through maybe or probably 250,000, something like that. So then that allowed me over the next few years to go from 100 to 150 to 200 to 250. And then from there, I was able to get into a role where not only was I running my own sales desk, but I was also managing other people. So I was leading people. I was getting a cut of what everyone was making, but I also was running my own sales desk. And then obviously in the background over these 7 years is, taking that money and putting it to work through the stock market and through real estate. But in the very beginning, it was, how do I raise my income so that I can, and really it was, how do I create value? I mean, at the core of raising your income, it's how valuable is my skill set? Because there's guys or girls that sit around and maybe they dig holes all day and they get $10 an hour and they work just as hard, if not, probably way harder than I was working when we're talking about digging holes. But there's certain skill sets that are more valuable. And I think that, that's kind of something I understood early on, is that, the extreme case here is Elon Musk has the same amount of hours in the day as I do, and probably works the same amount of hours, but that guy's at 200 billion and I'm at, 1 to 2 million. Right. So it's you can kind of conceptualize, okay, what are the skills that are more higher value? And it's really using your thinking, your knowledge, your leadership. And then there's certain industries where basically if you can solve a problem that most people can't solve, that's in high demand, that creates a lot of value for a company, like something like technology or something like sales or something like leadership, you can work the same amount of hours, but increase your earning potential or your value that you provide. So that's kind of where I guess started with my journey.
Yeah, there's a lot of really good stuff, I think, that you just brought up. And I remember when I got out of the military and I got my first job was, I don't know, it was like $80,000 or $90,000 a year or something like that. And I remember I went to a mentor and I said, I want to get into real estate investing. I don't really want to do this job, right? And he said, well, your first problem is going to be cash flow, because it's the same thing you're saying. You've got to have some kind of income, because you're not going to have much to invest in, and you're also not going to have much to live off of or to kind of like build this income around. So I thought about that a lot, and that's kind of how I built a lot of my strategies, just like what you're talking about. The other thing that you brought up is you strategically tried to find a position that had a high ceiling or high upward movement for income, and you looked at different sales roles and growing into potential sales jobs that have these commission structures where you can get upwards of 250, 300K a year, which is another great point when people out here who are listening to this are looking for a specific job to create this type of income. Is picking the job is part of the game, and you had taken on a little bit of risk because there's a lot of downside. If you don't have a cushy salary if you don't hit your sales goals, but you were able to find these opportunities with high income. So I think that's a really good foundation for people to think about, is that you need income, high income to start. And that's kind of like step one, it sounds like, at least in what your journey looked like.
Yeah. And I think that, I was talking about defense isn't as important, but at the very beginning, right, you have to set a foundation of, I hate kind of the word budget because it's got kind of a connotation to it, but how you're going to be spending intentionally. And so for me, from the beginning, I made a few sacrifices. One, I didn't take out debt in college because I worked, so I didn't have to. I didn't have debt, and then also I was in a fraternity in college. I was president of the fraternity, and then a spot opened up when I graduated to be the house dad, which lives in the fraternity house. Which you could imagine how terrible that was for 2 years trying to work a 9-to-5 job, also living in a fraternity house. But at the same time, I didn't have to pay rent. I didn't have to pay utilities. I didn't have a car payment. I was really maybe just spending money on food. So what that allowed me to do was take a little more risk in my job decision to maybe do something that's lower income, give me a year or two to build that up. Right now I can go out and obviously get an apartment or do whatever I want to do. But that's a sacrifice again that a lot of people probably weren't willing to make at that point. But for me, it allowed me to where I think I always talk about desperation and saying like, the more income you have, the less desperate you are to make decisions. Also, in the very beginning, the least amount of expenses you have frees you up to make decisions like I made, where if I would have gone out and said, well, screw this, I'm too good to live in a fraternity house for the next year or two or whatever it is, and I want to live in a downtown high-rise apartment, I probably would have took a $50,000 job, and I probably would have been able to barely afford the apartment, and then I would have capped my trajectory. So I think it's about trying to create a situation where you give yourself flexibility and freedom to not be desperate, and allow yourself to not be in a situation where, or to put yourself in a situation where you give yourself the opportunity to delay gratification until down the road, where other people either, they take the cookie too soon, or they force themselves to take a cookie because they're in a poor spot financially to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one thing I'm hearing as well that I think is a key detail is that your journey didn't just start at 22 when you graduated college, that these were decisions you were making probably at 18, 19 years old, of where you wanted to save your money. That's something that you and I also have in common. I chose an education. My education was paid for. I went to West Point. I got paid to go to school. I used that money when I was 18. Kids were going to New York City, and they were throwing cash around at high-rise hotels, because $500-600 a month to an 18-year-old kid that has no expenses and lives in barracks is nothing, right? Well, I was actually investing that money in the market, and I was doing that religiously, and I didn't go to the city. I didn't have any good experiences. I didn't have a lot of friends because of it, but that allowed me to have nest eggs that I could use when I was 23, 24 to reinvest into other opportunities. So what I'm hearing, you did almost the same thing in a lot of ways, where you were making decisions as early as possible, like starting today. Anybody listening can make some of these decisions, 18 to 19, which allowed you at even 22, 23 to take on more risk in your roles or whatever, to have higher upside because of some of those decisions. So that's all really key information for people to pay attention to here, is that it started really early. Number two, you tried to pick opportunities that had a lot of high income potential. Tell me where you went after you kind of started to build a good income. You had made some wise decisions to allow you to get to a position in that point. And then when did the investing start, really?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that all this stuff, people might hear it and maybe they're just starting off or they're young and they think, well, God, like this guy just had it all figured out, and it couldn't be further from the truth. Like you said, it was just kind of like, it was education and knowledge and seeking more, and it was just like one good decision at a time until I kind of figured out the next thing and then figured out the next thing. And now when I look back, it's like, oh, he knows all these things, but I didn't learn or know all these things to begin with. And I didn't learn them all at one time. And, at the beginning it was, hey, I know I don't want to take debt out in college. Like maybe I'll work, make some sacrifices here. Okay. I think I'm really going to need income. And then it was like, all right, well, now I have income. What do I do with it? Now the consistent learning is kind of the key piece, not necessarily knowing all the knowledge at one time. So, the next thing after the income, and I didn't wait until I was making 100,000 or 150,000 to start investing. All this stuff is kind of again, you learn it one at a time, but then you stack them on top of each other. So, when I was raising my income and I started investing, I didn't stop raising my income. And then when I was, raising my income and investing in the stock market, and then learned about real estate, I didn't stop investing in the stock market or stop raising my income. I just started stacking these things on top of one another because I had figured it out or mastered it, or at least mastered a way to continually grow. And then just add on ways to, I guess, multiply or leverage that knowledge. So from the beginning, I didn't know about real estate, when I was 22, 23. I wish I would have, I probably definitely would have got started earlier. But, I was like, all right, what's the best thing that I can learn about, or the quickest thing that I can learn about to start getting my money to work for me? And it was the stock market, because the stock market, you can't overcomplicate it if just like anything else. But in reality, it came down to like picking out a good diversified portfolio of companies that you believe in that are going to be around for the long term, whether that be, index funds or index funds plus, some single stocks here and there, or industry ETFs or whatever. But for me, it was like, hey, let me get this moving. And then once I saw me raising my income, but then also my income was or through appreciation or dividends or both. There was money that was being made without me doing anything at all, and I think like once you see that to begin with, you're like, this is like pretty crazy. And you can start to conceptualize how down the road there's a point where, you can get to where you take you working out of the equation completely. And there's just these things, these stocks for real estate or whatever, that are earning money that don't require your presence. And then obviously that is how people make a lot of money, where you own businesses and there's all these people that are working, right? And you're still working the same hours in a day as they are, but you have equity is really kind of the big thing. So for me to begin with, though, it was the stock market. And again, kind of back to the continual learning. I mean, I pretty much have read probably at least a book a month or more, probably 2 books a month for like the last, 6 or 7 years. I switched to like Audible, which really helped me. Kind of like I just took away dead space when I was riding in my car to work, and basically threw books on about personal finance, stocks, real estate, whatever, on like 1.8 speed, to where like I could kind of like get the most out of it while it didn't sound like you were playing a tape backwards. It was like a good balance. And I just tried to learn everything I possibly could. And, I put on Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I think people ask me this all the time. And I don't remember, I guess, the exact moment where I'm like, yeah, real estate, but I think it was Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which, I mean, I know, but there's a lot of people that, maybe have heard about it, but basically it's just a book where a guy talks about the importance of buying assets that actually produce income. Like your house that you live in is an asset. You have equity in it. It's an asset on your balance sheet, but it's not producing income for you. You can't live off of it because it's an expense. It doesn't mean it's bad, but it's not an income producing asset. But there's things like rental real estate where, obviously other people live in it. You pay the bills on it, but there's cash flow at the end of the month if you do it correctly, that are producing income for you. And so I thought that was a really neat idea, because prior, when I thought about the stock market, I'm like, okay, the idea with the stock market, like how do you retire with the stock market? Well, essentially there's like a study, it's called the 4% rule, where you can, you have to build up basically 25 times your annual expenses, which is saying it's the same thing as saying you can withdraw 4% of your total balance and live off of it. But if you want to live off of like $100,000 a year, that's like a $2.5 million, stock portfolio, which is a ton of money, right? And it would take a lot of time, even earning high income. So I was kind of like, all right, how can I actually produce income and cash flow and also diversify at the same time? So I was looking for a house at that point to live in. I bought a house, and then 2 or 3 months later, pretty quick, I had just been doing a ton of research, learning about real estate. I had a buddy of mine that was a realtor, and he kind of introduced me to a lot of people. And then I bought my first triplex. And it was just super quick. I mean, it took me like a year and a half, maybe, of reading books and stuff. And I was like, I don't know. Like it's a big decision, especially the first time, trying to get into it. It's scary, just like anything else. But, I had just gotten really good at I guess what people call the leading indicators. So there's, like a lagging indicator is like, oh, I want to buy a rental property. But a leading indicator is like, all right, I'm going to, run the numbers on 5 properties every day for, and you just do that, and you gain confidence through knowledge and through experience, instead of just creating a goal with no real actionable steps. So I got to the point where I knew the numbers like the back of my hand. And I could almost look at a triplex and tell you like what the general cash flow was, and whether or not it was something I would even look at just by, first glance almost. And so I saw one that was like, at first of all, I thought there was something wrong with it, because I was like, that can't be right. There's got to be like ghosts in it or something, because it's like way too good of a deal. This is 5 years ago. And it wasn't. I mean, it turned out real. I, did the deal, and then before you knew it, it was like within 2 weeks or so, we had closed on it. And I was like, what just happened? Which is kind of how a lot of things are in life. It's like all this buildup. And then it happens, like it's like graduation or whatever. And you're just like, what happened? So that's kind of, I guess, the first experience for me. That's how I got started, I guess, in real estate.
Yeah. So then as you started to get into, the real estate investing world, what were some of those types of things you were looking for in these types of deals, or how did you go about trying to find them? I think that a lot of people can relate to kind of how you spent a good amount of time planning, and then at a certain point you were like, I've got to just execute this and try to figure it out. And then once you started getting into the execution and knowing what you wanted to look for, how did you figure out what you wanted? How did you figure out how to analyze a deal, how you could find opportunities with equity baked into the deal, those types of strategies that do increase net worth quite rapidly?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just, I say like knowledge mitigates risk, and also knowledge gives confidence, and so how do you and experience as well, but how do you get experience if you've never done it before? Like if it's your first deal, I think that's what a lot of people struggle with. Like, okay, well, I've never done this before. How can I feel confident in this decision? But what people don't understand is that you can outsource experience. And the way you do that is through books, mentors, people in your area, real estate clubs, because you get to take someone else's experience that's already done it. Maybe they've already made the mistakes. Maybe they've already made the money, and they can give you what, exactly how to do it without you ever having done it. Right. So I think it's important, especially in real estate. It's an incredible game that's built around relationships. And I think what you'll find in real estate is that, you think like people like, oh, like, I don't want to give you info. It's like competition. But I think the community itself is almost like its own little fraternity in a way where, men and women alike like to help out other people who are getting started in it. There's, I joined some local, clubs in my area, which at the time, I guess they're probably meeting in person again now, but this was way before COVID, they were meeting in person. So we were, I would go and I would meet people that own 50 units or 100 units. And I was like, I would be able to ask them, be able to talk to them. They'd be able to, work me through stuff. And I'd be able to kind of leverage or outsource in a way their experience. But from the beginning, what I knew I was looking for was like, hey, I want to kind of do a small multifamily deal on my first one. And I want to make sure that the property itself will be able to sustain itself without me having to pour cash flow in it to keep it afloat. So the obviously appreciation is great for me. At the first point, I was thinking like, hey, I'm looking for like maximum cash flow, while also obviously considering, where is this thing? Like, is it, obviously you could probably find some great cash flow deals in places with super high crime rates and stuff like that. So like, while still considering where it is in the location, what is the best way that I can maximize cash flow? And for me, for my first deal, single family didn't make much sense. At the time, my belief was like, all right, well, and what if this gets, what if there's a vacancy? What if, and I was running the numbers and like, maybe at the time, maybe there's a single family home that was $150,000 and you could only rent it for maybe $1,300 or $1,400, but maybe you could find a triplex that costs about the same thing, but you could rent it for $2,500 to $3,000 because it was 3 units at $900 a piece, instead of 1 unit for one single family home. So for me, it was like, I think that a multifamily gives you a lot less. I mean, it's an interesting situation. I think it's less risk with more potential gain, because if there's a vacancy, you still have 2 other units that are, at least probably holding you afloat or close while you or the property manager finds fills the vacancy. But you are also typically able to charge a much higher rent, for the space as a whole, because you're breaking it up into, singular, 3 units instead of, one thing. So for me, I was looking for small multifamily. Obviously, if I could buy it under value, something that maybe needed a little bit of work, that's kind of what I was looking for, and that's what I did find on that first deal.
Do you still look for those, or are you growing into other types of real estate strategies?
Yeah, so I mean, right now I'm kind of I just refinanced not too long ago out of another multifamily that I kind of bird, which is essentially, for maybe people that don't know, is buying, renovating it, renting it out. So basically you're trying, it's almost like a fix and flip where you try to raise the value by renovating it, but instead of flipping it and selling it, you rent it out and you go and you refinance with the bank. And so you're able to pull all or most of your money back out that you put into it, to then go find another deal. So that's kind of where I'm at. Obviously, I've had a lot of things going on, personally, professionally, with social media and stuff like that. So I've been really busy, but I'm still looking kind of for that next deal. I'm in between maybe just scaling up into something instead of 3 to 4 units, maybe something that's like 7, 8, or either I'm also kind of looking at Airbnbs and specifically Airbnb like experiences in a couple of different markets, to kind of try to almost, I guess, like a niche Airbnb is how you could describe it. I've got a good friend of mine that is very similar to me. I actually met him. He's got a social media account like I do. And we found out that we lived in the same city, started hanging out a lot, playing golf together, and he owns a bunch of Airbnbs. So that might be maybe the next move for me, but I still think that, the small multifamily is a great way to kind of build wealth, if you can find the right properties in the right areas.
I think that's a really good strategy for people starting out. The classic, I guess, scenarios you can do. One way to call it is the boarding house strategy, where you rent out you could buy a single family house, rent out bedrooms to your friends, and you could make money that way. But you could just multiply that if you got a small multifamily, 3 or 4 units like you're talking about, where you could just rent out independent units and bedrooms within your unit if you want. And you could do that as a young 22, 23-year-old. That's probably something I would do looking back on it if I wasn't, married or was just single hanging out. And then, like you're saying, you could kind of accumulate those different ones and eventually do the BRRRR method, the buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat method, or whatever, and those are some really great strategies for people starting out. And I think you've outlined those pretty nicely. The Airbnb strategy is really interesting strategy as well that you touched on. I'm just kind of dipping my toes into that with this Florida property I bought. Gosh, man, dude, some of these Airbnbs though, like when you want to go high end with them, you don't even know what people are going to complain about. It's just, it's like the weirdest things. This lady, her family came in and they destroyed one of my ceiling fans, and then somehow gave me 4 stars for that because she said the ceiling fan was low. And I was like, this is a normal ceiling fan height. And I'm
how did you get to it? How did they get to it? What did they do?
I think they had a lot of kids. Families are the worst. I thought families would be great, but the kids just destroy the place. You want old people. So thankfully this market has a lot of old people. But anyway, the Airbnb, it's an interesting strategy. And one of my friends actually does Airbnbs without owning them. He does it all with rental arbitrage. So he just locks them up into long-term leases and then just sublets it and has no risk at all and only upside. And that's a great strategy you can do in commercial and residential. So when I started this building here, that's what I did last year, was I did a lease with an option to buy. And I leased the whole building out, and I sublet out all the offices. And then eventually, as I got all the offices rented, I exercised my option to buy, as everybody had been rented now. And the option to buy was way better. It was during COVID. Everyone thought office space was dead, and I happened to be right. But so that is a lot of really great tips and strategies, I think, for people. So what is kind of, what is the cookie cutter advice that you give people? I heard a lot of things of knowledge is a great strategy. You can teach yourself almost anything through books, through mentors. If you could go back to your 18-year-old self and look at all the good and bad decisions you made, how could you even shorten this more? How could you get someone to the $1 million mark, when they're in 23, 24 even?
Yeah, I think about that sometimes, and it's interesting because there is just a time factor with it all. Of course, I could have told myself, hey, start just documenting what you're doing, start documenting the process. Like sometimes I think about, I started my social media account like a year and a half ago. And I started it basically like 4, 5, maybe 6 years after I started doing all this stuff. So, not every account, like my account now is more of like a coach and helping people build wealth because I've already attained a certain level that a lot of people are trying to get to, that I can help them get there. But, not every social media account has to be like that. I think there's a lot of great ones out there where it's people that are younger and they're just kind of documenting their journey and where they, how they're going through things and how they're learning, the mistakes they're making. And I think it's really interesting because I think like, social media was big, but not like it is now. And sometimes I think like if I would have started, an Instagram account 6 or 7 years ago and just started putting content out there, I think that people kind of, they underestimate the power of the internet and podcast. I mean, creating content really, podcasting, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, all these different things where you can grow an audience. I think is something that when you look back over 6, 7 years, or let's play a game where right now my following online is like 140,000, and like half of that came in like the last 3 or 4 months. So it took me probably like a year and 2 months to get to 70,000. It took me like only another 4 months to get another 70,000. So what is that going to look like in 6 months, or what is that going to look like in 2 years or 3 years? I mean, I think that, granted some catastrophe, right? Knock on wood, it only goes higher. It only grows bigger, and it only allows me more potential to help more people and give more value. And so I think that maybe if I would have started something like that earlier, I think in general, when it comes to all the other stuff, as far as income, stocks, real estate, it's all kind of the same stuff. I think that everybody, the biggest conundrum or dilemma of life is like, hey, I don't know enough, right? It's not the perfect moment for me to do X, Y, Z. I don't know enough to do real estate. And again, yes,
the paralysis by analysis thing.
Right? Yeah. And you have to have knowledge. You have to educate yourself. I'm not saying like, oh, just, like, hey, you never know anything about real estate, go buy a property tomorrow and figure it out. Like that's a good way to lose a lot of money and not be in a good spot. But, at some point, it's like, hey, I'm never going to know enough to do this thing. But the only way to know enough to do this thing is to do this thing. Like, because then you're going to get knowledge and experience from the day to day of whatever it is, running a property, getting tenants, like, you're never gonna, and I think that like that's so like simple, but at the same time, like profound, is that people don't understand like that you have to do whatever the thing is that you want to be good at. And the cool thing is that if you just commit to doing whatever it is, I mean, it's like me trying to, hey, I want to be a bodybuilder and I'm just gonna read books and read books and read books. And I wonder why I don't look like a bodybuilder, but the cool thing is if I want to be a bodybuilder and I work out every single day, it is almost physically impossible for me to not be in really great shape come 6 months or 2 years or 5 years down the road. So I tell people, what do you want to be good at? Like, pick out one, maybe two things. What do you want to be good at? If it's, working out, or if it's real estate or investing or making more money, then what are the 3 to 5 the things that you need to do every single day in order to be good at whatever that thing is, to where you go, okay, if I do these 3 to 5 things every day, there is zero possible percentage points that I am not way better at this in 3 months and then 6 months and then 12 months. So I think it's really trying to figure out, like, breaking down these big, crazy things that are scary into just consistent daily actions. Like with social media, when I started, sometimes I look at the posts I made and I was like, I can't believe you posted that. And there's nothing wrong with them. They were just terribly made. They were just like, I was using like lime green. Like it almost makes you want to throw up, like looking at it. But now, I've got posts that do millions and millions of posts. And what did I do? I just posted every single day. Right. So I naturally got better. I found out better ways to write, better ways to convey ideas, better ways to provide value to people. That's just how obviously anything in life works, is figuring out what do you want to be good at, getting around people that are doing that thing, reading books or information otherwise about that thing, and trying to take as much action as you possibly can. And then of course, letting, time and patience kind of work out the rest. So that's typically kind of what, I tell people when it comes to just like young kids. It's just, picking out those things early on and really just kind of sticking in it for the long haul. I mean, it's like, there's so many sports references, but it's like, I was watching Tom Brady play golf last night and I'm looking at this guy's body and I'm like, how in the world has this guy won 7 Super Bowls? Of course he's older now, but it's because at a certain point, even in sports, it's no longer as much about who's the most physically talented. It's about the person that put in the most work, the most consistently for the most years, and then so if you do that, then that's where you're going to start to see like the people that were on your level and whatever we're talking about, in a year, like you're like, wow, like I guess they haven't been working. And then that gap just starts to grow and grow and grow. So I think it's about like, hey, how can I put in consistent daily productive efforts and, obviously remember along the way that, you gotta enjoy it. I think is kind of the information that I give to people that are, maybe younger, 20, 22 years old, kind of like right in college or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think there's certainly a sweet spot in when you have enough knowledge to be able to execute. I've thought about that a lot. That's why I asked you. And it's just like, are there thresholds? Are there KPPs? Are there metrics? And people give me crap for some of the numbers I rattle off, but like I just try to think of how I usually look at stuff. And one example is like if it's a cap rate and it's not above 10%, I probably won't look at it, right? Like I can tell you because I played D1 football. People are like, hey, is my kid going to go D1? I'm like, if they're not over 6 foot and they don't run under a 4.8 40, they're not playing D1 football. So it's just like there's a couple like little things you can do. So it's like, okay, so if I tell you cap rate over 10%, and there should be an X factor in the location. So right there, someone said, well, what's a cap rate? Great. Now go learn that you got something to go Google or figure out or read books about. You go figure out how to calculate a cap rate. Go figure out all the details that go into figuring out your net operating income statement and figuring out how you can go analyze real estate deals going forward, right? So like there's certain things that like I think that are good indicators for people to say, now I could maybe dig into this or take a stab at it. I'm not saying if you see a cap rate that's 12% that you should go execute on that deal. I'm just saying that like that might be an indicator that you could start digging into it a little bit and it might be.
I think that's a great point too. Kind of, I tell people all the time too, like, you don't have to chase like if we're talking about millionaires, right? You can figure out what do millionaires do statistically, like they make X amount of money or whatever. But I see something all the time where, people, and it's usually people talking about lower income and they say, well, guess what? Only 30% of millionaires made over 6 figures. And I'm like, you know what that means? It means 70% of them did. So, which statistics should we try to chase, right? I think too often people are, you chase the rule, not the exception, So I think it's like trying to figure out, and maybe not every rule is for you, right? If every millionaire wears a blue shirt, right? Or whatever, maybe that doesn't fit into your life. But I think there's a lot of things where you can, like you said, like with D1, like you're 6'1", and you got to run a certain 40 time. I think those are like, obviously you can't change your height, but maybe you're somebody and you're a linebacker, you're running like a 5'3" or something. You're like, all right, I need to work on my speed because I know that 82% of middle linebackers that are in the situation that I want to be in at the schools I want to be in run this time, right? And so you work on, those things to be like the people that are already in, the spots that you want to be in. So I thought that was a good point.
Yeah, even like so Dave Ramsey and his team, they put out a big study on millionaires, right? And they interviewed like 10,000 different millionaires. And I think it was something like the top 5 of them were professions you'd never think about, right? Like teachers, engineers, nurses, things like that. Well, what that study didn't talk about was that was most of them at retirement age, which is great, right?
Yeah. When did they get there? Which
is why I wanted to talk to you, which is because if you're looking at people that are millionaires before they're 30 or before they're 40, their strategies are much different. They take on a lot more risk. There's a lot different styles, right? Like what we're not talking about here is that, yeah, you have $1.5 million of net worth, but you're probably carrying at least half of that as liability on your balance sheet. So you're probably looking at $3 or $4 million of assets, but a lot of that is owed to mortgages or to lenders or whatever. Not saying that's what you're doing, but at least like, and most people that are building up real estate portfolios are taking advantage of leveraged debt. So it's like, that's a lot of risk to take on. And when Dave was 28, he did all that and got into trouble because he couldn't cash flow it because of what we're talking about. There wasn't enough income to be able to cash flow a big liability balance sheet. So then Dave went the other way and started preaching a lot more conservative strategies to try to build wealth. And he did that because he had a great personality in radio and was able to accelerate that really quickly. But you don't always mess up, when you're 28, 29. You can still do those strategies and be smart about it, but it's just about having the income to be able to cover those different assets. You can keep your day job and build a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio. That's okay. Like I'm not the guy that says go run away and go start your passion project today. I mean, you can take different approaches to it, but the point is, real estate specifically is a fantastic strategy to build wealth young if you are smart about how you do it and mitigate the risk correctly.
100%.
Yeah, man. Well, dude, hey, what final tips do you have to people? You covered some great things. You talked about knowledge. You talked about taking action when you've got the right amount of knowledge, looking for certain thresholds or indicators out there, not being afraid to get started early and quickly. Just from what you explained to me, I don't think there's any excuse for someone, no matter where they're at, to not be able to build a $1 million portfolio in a decade. It's just like, that doesn't seem complicated. I think I've seen so many people do it, and that's part of the reason I'm doing this series on the show, is to showcase those folks like you that have done that. What are your tips to people that are just getting started or that need that encouragement?
Yeah, I think that, and I try to push myself in this capacity almost every single day. But, when we start off when we're born and even till we're 18 years old, and still to this day, even me right now, the amount that I know is smaller than this dot. And the amount of information and possibilities and things that are out there are literally infinite. And it's hard to kind of conceptualize, but that's why I read so much. That's why I talk to people so much, because if I would have never read books, I would have never gotten to real estate. If I wouldn't have talked to my friend that was a realtor, I wouldn't have gotten to real estate. If I wouldn't have, read all these personal finance books, I might not have raised my income. I might be in a different situation. So I think it's about exposing yourself to as many ideas as possible. And that doesn't mean that you have to chase every single idea that you read and make it a part of it. But I think that all of our thoughts and all the words that come out of my mouth are a combination of every word or idea I've ever heard from my parents, the people I've hung out with, the books I've read, the TV shows I've watched, right? And so all this, your input determines your output. That is the only, no possible thing I've ever said has just came out of thin air, right? It's all like idea
you
or
had
something
to have learned it at some point, right?
Picked from somewhere, right? And each person has infinitely different experiences, right? Like even if I had a twin brother, they would have a little bit different life than me. And that's what makes us all unique, to where it doesn't seem like we're just picking little things, because you don't know every single person or every single thing I've ever done. But it's about kind of building that, okay, who do I want to be and what do I want to be good at? And how do I build an input system around that? And, again, obviously it's surrounding yourself with the right people. They say your network's your net worth, or whatever 5 people you hang out with, you're going to become the 6th, all those kind of things, which are true. Reading books. And then it also kind of comes down to, even now I tell people, it sounds kind of funny, but who you follow on social media is going to have a large impact on us. A lot of people just follow Barstool and all that stuff, which I follow too. But at the same time, I also follow a lot of people that, life doesn't have to be grind. You can have some fun in there too. But, I was reading a stat that the other day, 78% of people get the majority of their news or their information from social media, which is concerning, right? I would rather it come from books and stuff like that. But if that's the reality, and I challenge everybody that's listening to this, go download Moment or one of those apps on your phone. How much are you spending on your phone? One, should probably get off of it a little more. And that's coming from a guy that, is on social media as basically his job now. But also it's like, all right, if I'm going to be on there, how do I surround myself with positive thinking, people that are in places above me, to where when I'm on there, I'm going to be growing, at least subconsciously through what I'm doing. So it's books, social media, mentors, friends, and really having, that positive input. And obviously that the goal is to create that positive output, which comes out in the words you say, the actions you take, the things you accomplish. And it all comes from, what you put in your body and your mind. It affects what comes out of it, which is pretty, obvious. But again, a lot of people, they fill their heads with news. And, I try to watch enough just to stay up to date with what's going on, but people overwatch news, over binge, Netflix, over binge bad food. Right. And then as a result, the poor input turns into poor output. So I would think just watch what you're putting in your body and watch what putting in your mind, and make sure that it's it reflects what you want to come out of your body and your mind.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Like, everything you learn or say or do had to come in at some point. So it's like, if you can be that floodgate, filter out what's coming in and what you're consuming and what you're learning and who you're surrounding yourself with, you're going to end up a product of that. It's like the old saying, you are what you eat. Well, it's like you are what you consume, what you hear, what you learn. Great point. Wow, Tyler, where can people, follow along? Obviously, Defining Wealth is where I ran into you. I love your content. A lot of your stuff mimics my philosophy, so I recommend people check out your Instagram at least. But where else can people go to find you and connect?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram right now at Defining Wealth. I'm on Twitter at Defining Wealth. It's a little bit different content. Twitter is more writing and threads and ideas. Instagram's a mix, and obviously there's stories and lives. And so there's different ways to get different ideas from me. I'm also, I had to get on TikTok, which makes me feel like I'm like 50 years old instead of 30. But I'm on there too. And I think that TikTok actually now has got a lot of incredible people on there. Of course, there's the BS and the dancing like every other app, but at the same time, there's a lot of people that are doing a lot of cool things on there. And then
so you're not dancing for real estate,
Yeah, maybe a little bit here and there, but try to focus on, providing, valuable content just in a video form, which I think there's people that learn in different ways and people that expose themselves to different content in different ways. And so maybe that will lead them to, a course or something like that, where they're able to expand on their knowledge, get started in real estate or whatever it might be. So yeah, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, and that's pretty much it for now. But I got goals in the future to, probably get into YouTube, maybe even a podcast, stuff like that. So kind of excited to see, how things pan out over the year to come.
Right on, brother. Hey, man. Well, thank you so much for jumping on today. I learned a lot from you, and I hope that other people, can take some of these different strategies that you found and, start to implement them into their life. And I think that people that are serious about building wealth and doing it in strategies like real estate or investing, this is a great start for them. So I appreciate you taking the time today.
Cool, man. Well, like I said, I appreciate you having me on, and I really enjoyed chopping it up and just talking about all this kind of stuff, and kind of getting to give a little bit and also learn a lot at the same time. So I definitely appreciate it.
Well, we could probably talk about this stuff forever, but you guys are listening to Winners, Wallets, and Worldviews podcast. Winners, people crushing it. Wallets, money, real estate, small business, finance, and Worldviews. What are those values, leadership lessons, and philosophies that really drive us to get there? So thank you all for listening. Go out there, be somebody. You can listen to this podcast at winnerswalletsandworldviews.com or aaronjarmstrong.com/podcast.